Andersonville, Georgia. This is the site of the infamous Confederate prisoner of war camp where 45,000 Union soldiers were kept. They were not given any shelter, and so they made their own makeshift shelters like this by somehow finding pieces of wood and then taking their camp blankets and covering them up to keep themselves out of the sun. Down the center of this property here was a creek named, ironically, Sweetwater Branch, which served as drinking water, but it also served as the place where the soldiers would bathe and where the Confederate officers would drop their sewage, which of course led to tremendous dysentery, typhus, and other diseases, including measles, that broke out among the 45,000 U.S. Union troops that were here for 14 months at the end of the Civil War. One of the other things that this place is noted for is the famous word deadline. So this was the place where over on the edge you see those sticks sticking up out of the ground. That's the deadline. If a Union prisoner walked beyond that line, one of the Confederate guards would shoot them on sight. And so some prisoners just got delirious and they forgot about this, and they would stumble across into that no man's land and they were shot down dead. That's the word deadline. You see the stockade behind me that surrounded the camp. In those 14 months, 13,000 Union troops died here at Andersonville. Now, this was only one of many camps throughout the Confederacy, but there were also many camps in the North. One of the most difficult camps where a lot of people died was on an island in Lake Erie, just off of Sandusky, Ohio. And many of the Confederates died there, but instead of the heat and the bugs, sorry, we're waving away the flies here, there in Lake Erie, they fought the cold, the bitter cold, and many of the Confederate prisoners of war died of frostbite and other diseases there as well. So one of the reasons for this camp was that when Ulysses S. Grant took over as the general-in-chief over all of the armies of the Union, one of the strategic things that he did that was very wise from a military standpoint was that he stopped the prisoner exchanges, because he knew that even though he lost prisoners from the Union armies, those could be replenished by the almost endless supply of human capital in the North. Whereas in the South, they had what they called their last man. They had fought their last man in the last ditch. You've heard of a last ditch effort? Well, that's where that comes from, the last man in the last ditch fighting the Civil War. And he knew that if they gave the prisoners of war back, that they just keep fighting. Whereas if they were to stop the prisoner exchange and keep them in Union POW camps, well, that would cause that attrition to happen in the Southern armies. And it was one of the ways that Grant was able to affect the defeat of the Confederate armies. You know, all of the generals before Ulysses S. Grant that were in charge of the Union armies, and in particular the Army of the Potomac, they had all the same resources. They had the support of President Lincoln and of Secretary of War Stanton. But what was the difference that caused the war to close? One of the major differences was the strategy implemented by Ulysses S. Grant, which included the continuance of the Anaconda line that went all the way around, the Navy blockade of all the southern ports that squeezed the financial life out of the South. And then when Grant implemented his strategies of fighting and not ever retreating, but just continually fighting until the end of the war, where he had armies that went to the strategic locations to keep the Confederate armies from reinforcing where the need was, and then cutting off the prisoners of war. And then the final strategy was to employ African American troops, former slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation said that they were allowed to take up arms and to fight on the side of the Union. And Grant, once he saw how well these former slaves fought, he put them into practice, and those black troops were a big part of turning the tide of the war. And so this is a place of sadness, a place of tragedy, but also a place of the inevitability of war, and how that war was won in large measure because of the strategy of Ulysses S. Grant. From Andersonville, Georgia, I'm Craig Von Buseck.